A civilization could one day thrive not on land, but inside the violent sky of another world. This is the breathtaking vision of floating cities in the skies of gas giants. The astronomer Carl Sagan once said that somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known. This idea is a testament to that search, pushing the very limits of human imagination and engineering. It represents the ultimate fusion of our survival instinct and creative ambition, proposing a future where we make our home within the endless atmospheres of planets like Jupiter or Saturn. By the end of this journey, you will understand the staggering science that could make this possible and what it reveals about our future among the stars. We will confront how a city could survive winds 10 times stronger than Earth's worst hurricanes, and ask what kind of society would choose to live where the ground is a deadly illusion. What does our most audacious dream of home say about us? The first close-up images of Jupiter were a revelation of terrifying beauty. The Voyager probes sent back visions of a world in perpetual, chaotic motion, with storms larger than our entire planet swirling in bands of ochre, cream, and deep red. It looked less like a place and more like a force of nature. This immediately poses a profound question. With the Moon and Mars as seemingly more logical destinations, why would our most ambitious dream of a future home settle on such a violent, gaseous abyss? The answer is not about finding another Earth, but about accessing something entirely new. Gas giants are not barren rocks. They are immense reservoirs of raw potential. Planetary scientists like Dr. Athena Kaustenis point to their atmospheres as vast chemical storehouses, rich with hydrogen, helium, and complex organic molecules. These are the fundamental building blocks for future energy, manufacturing, and even sustainable life support, all floating in essentially limitless supply. This vision hinges on a fascinating scientific concept known as the habitable band. Think of a gas giant's atmosphere not as a uniform soup, but as a layered onion. Deeper down, pressure and heat become unsurvivable, crushing and melting any known material. Higher up, the thin cold and radiation take over, but somewhere in between, theorists suggest there could be a Goldilocks zone. A layer where the temperature and pressure could be remarkably similar to what we experience here on Earth's surface. In this narrow, stable ribbon of sky, a floating structure would not need to fight against impossible extremes just to maintain its basic shape. It would be like building a research station in the deepest ocean trench, but with one crucial inversion. Instead of battling to keep the immense pressure out, you are battling to keep it in, using the outside pressure to your advantage, floating buoyantly in a dense sea of air. The resources here extend far beyond atmospheric gases. A gas giant's powerful gravity represents a constant, tremendous source of energy, potentially harvestable in ways we are only beginning to understand. And there is a paradoxical freedom in the absence of a traditional surface. You are unbound from the limitations of terrain, geology, and seismic activity. Your city is defined not by where it sits, but by what it can do in the open sky. Our draw to these turbulent worlds speaks to a core human trait, not just the desire to explore, but the need to master the most formidable environments the universe has to offer. Yet this foundational dream immediately collides with a stark and brutal reality. To live in that habitable band, we must first learn to survive the journey to it, through an atmospheric gauntlet unlike anything our engineering has ever faced. The transition from a serene habitable band to that band is a descent into pure atmospheric fury. To reach that pocket of relative calm, any vessel or city must first pass through a realm where the weather itself is a permanent, planet-spanning cataclysm. Jupiter's winds scream at over 400 miles per hour, 10 times the force of a Category 5 hurricane, and they never cease. These are not passing storms, They are the default state of the atmosphere, a supersonic jet stream wrapping the entire planet in bands of unimaginable violence. And within this chaos sit tempests of legendary scale, like the Great Red Spot, a storm that has raged for centuries and is large enough to swallow Earth whole. Atmospheric physicist Dr. Scott Bolton, who leads the Juno mission, describes these forces as fundamental planetary engines, driven by the immense heat radiating from the gas giant's core. The physics at play here introduce a concept alien to earthly engineering: hydrodynamic stress. On our world, buildings are designed to handle wind pushing against them. But within a fluid atmosphere this dense and fast-moving, the forces are more akin to a raging river constantly tearing at a submerged structure. The pressure changes are not gradual, they are radical and sudden, creating shear forces that could twist and rip apart any rigid object not specifically designed to yield and flow. This presents the first monumental design puzzle. How do you build something that can withstand a permanent, supersonic hurricane? The answer lies not in building a fortress, but in creating something more like a living organism within the current. Architects and engineers look toward biomimicry, drawing inspiration from nature's own solutions to fluid dynamics. Consider the design of certain deep-sea creatures or resilient plants, which survive incredible pressures and currents not by resisting them outright, but by having flexible, streamlined forms that allow forces to flow around and past them. A floating city in this environment could not be a collection of rigid skyscrapers. Its very skeleton would need to be adaptive, composed of advanced materials with memory and incredible tensile strength, perhaps smart alloys or carbon nanomaterials that can flex under stress and return to shape. The entire structure might resemble a vast, buoyant network, a geodesic web, or a series of interconnected, teardrop-shaped modules, each oriented to present the smallest possible profile to the prevailing winds. But flexibility alone is not enough. Survival would depend on a nervous system as advanced as the skeleton, a real-time atmospheric modeling network. Thousands of sensors across the city's surface would constantly feed data into a central intelligence, predicting microbursts, shear layers, and pressure drops seconds or minutes before they arrive. This system could then dynamically adjust the city's form, subtly shifting the orientation of modules, adjusting buoyancy in specific sectors, or even temporarily reshaping entire districts to ride out a particularly violent jet stream front. The city would dance with the storm, a conscious participant in the atmospheric flow rather than a passive victim of it. This redefines urban planning from the ground up, or rather from the sky down. There are no static foundations, only dynamic equilibrium. Every design choice, from the layout of transportation tubes to the placement of energy collectors, must account for a world in constant, violent motion. Mastering this endless atmospheric onslaught is the first non-negotiable condition for existence, but it only solves the problem of staying in one piece. It does not solve the problem of staying in one place. To avoid being swept away into the deeper, crushing layers or the outer radiation belts, the city must solve an even more delicate puzzle: the art of holding position in a sky with no anchor. Staying intact within the hurricane is only half the battle, for a city that cannot hold its place is doomed to a slow, drifting demise. The ground beneath your feet is not rock or soil, but a precise and precarious balance of forces. Here, architecture gives way to the principles of aeronautics, and the entire settlement must become a master of buoyancy. Think of it not as a building with foundations, but as the most sophisticated vessel ever conceived, one that must perpetually adjust its depth in an ocean of air to remain within that narrow, life-sustaining band. The core principle is elegantly simple, yet devilishly complex to execute at this scale. To float, the city's overall density must be less than the atmosphere surrounding it. This is achieved through vast envelopes. Think of them as the city's hidden lungs, filled with a lifting gas that is lighter than the local mix of hydrogen and helium. Aerospace engineers working on next-generation high-altitude platforms, like those at companies exploring stratospheric aerostats, point to heated hydrogen-helium mixtures as a leading candidate. By carefully warming the gas inside these massive chambers, its density decreases, providing more lift, much like a hot air balloon. Cooling it allows the structure to descend. This creates a dynamic equilibrium where lift, the weight of the entire city structure, and the atmospheric drag from those eternal winds are in a constant, calculated balance. Active control systems would monitor this balance thousands of times per second, making micro-adjustments to heating elements, venting small amounts of gas, or compressing others to maintain perfect station keeping. The penalty for failure is severe. Drift too deep and increasing pressure will eventually overwhelm your hull. Rise too high, and you enter a realm of freezing temperatures and lethal radiation. This turns every district of the city into a dual-purpose structure. A residential spire or a manufacturing hub is not just a place to live and work. It is also an active component of the buoyancy system, its shape and internal pressure carefully calibrated to contribute to the city's overall flotation. Envision a colossal network, not unlike a nuclear aircraft carrier in its complexity, but one that must keep itself aloft indefinitely without ever seeing a port. This raises a critical question of resilience. What happens if a primary buoyancy chamber is compromised by a micrometeorite or material fatigue? Redundancy would be woven into the city's very fabric, with distributed gas cells and rapid sealing systems, ensuring that the loss of one compartment triggers a graceful rebalancing across hundreds of others, preventing a catastrophic plunge. Yet this elegant, endless dance with equilibrium comes at a tremendous cost. The energy required to heat vast volumes of gas, to power the countless compression pumps, and to run the supercomputers managing this ballet is staggering. A floating city cannot afford to be passive. It must be a net producer of immense power, not just for its inhabitants, but for its own survival. This forces us to look beyond traditional solutions and ask, where in this turbulent sky can we find a power source great enough to sustain a civilization? The city's endless dance for buoyancy demands a constant, staggering torrent of power. This creates a profound paradox, floating within an atmosphere that is essentially an ocean of potential fuel. Yet finding a way to safely tap that reservoir is one of the greatest engineering puzzles imaginable. Traditional combustion is a non-starter, a dangerous and inefficient relic in an environment already saturated with volatile hydrogen. The lifeblood of this metropolis must come from something far more advanced and inherently stable. Energy scientists like Dr. Michio Kaku have long pointed to nuclear fusion as the holy grail for deep space civilization, and here that vision finds its ultimate test. The gas giant's atmosphere is rich in deuterium, a heavy isotope of hydrogen that is a prime fuel for fusion reactors. A successful fusion plant here would not just power the city, it would unleash a surplus so vast it could redefine the entire economy, enabling large-scale atmospheric processing and fuel production for starships. But the challenges are monumental, containing a miniature star within a structure that must also withstand hurricane-force winds and radical pressure shifts. The reactor's containment field and shielding would need to be a masterpiece of materials science, and a breach, while not a nuclear explosion in the traditional sense, could release a devastating plume of superheated plasma into the buoyant city. So engineers theorize backup and complementary systems woven into the sky itself. One concept involves tapping the planet's own ferocious kinetic energy. Imagine dynamic tethers, long conductive cables trailing from the city's lower sections, cutting through the gas giant's immensely powerful magnetic field. As the city holds its position, the planet's rotation sweeps this magnetic field past the tethers, generating a direct electrical current in a process known as electromagnetic induction. It is a way of turning the world's own spin into usable power. Another method looks to the thermal gradients between atmospheric layers, using the difference in temperature to drive massive heat engines. Each option carries its own balance of viability, scalability, and risk. Fusion offers immense density but great complexity. Tether systems are mechanically elegant but expose infrastructure to the deepest atmospheric stresses, and thermal harvesting might provide consistent baseline power but require enormous surface areas. The final solution would likely be a hybrid grid, a diverse portfolio of generation methods so that the failure of one source does not spell darkness for the entire city. This leads to the critical need for a distributed and resilient energy network. Power cannot be centralized in a single, vulnerable plant. Instead, generation and storage would be woven throughout the city's floating districts, with superconducting cables transferring energy across the network and vast banks of advanced capacitors or flywheels storing it for periods of peak demand or during maintenance on primary systems. Redundancy is not a luxury here, it is the core principle of survival. A cascading power failure would not mean a blackout. It would mean a loss of atmospheric processing, a failure of buoyancy control, and a silent, slow drift toward oblivion. Therefore, every subsystem is designed with multiple fail-safes and isolated backups, ensuring that even a major catastrophe in one sector can be contained and compensated for by the others. Securing this energy independence is the final pillar that allows the city to exist, but it forces a final, fundamental question. What are the bones and flesh of this place made from? What material could possibly be strong enough to contain a fusion reaction, flexible enough to ride a supersonic wind, and durable enough to last for generations in a chemical soup that would corrode conventional metals in a matter of months? The materials that form this city cannot exist on Earth. They must be conjured from the very atmosphere they are designed to withstand, engineered at the molecular level to perform feats no natural substance ever could. This is a challenge that goes beyond simple strength. It demands a symphony of properties that seem to contradict each other. The skeleton of a floating metropolis must be incredibly light to aid buoyancy, yet strong enough to resist being torn apart by hydrodynamic shear. It must remain flexible without fatiguing, bending like a reed in the eternal wind millions of times without developing a weak point. Perhaps most critically, it must be utterly immune to the chemical aggression of its environment. Hydrogen, the most abundant element here, poses a silent, insidious threat known as hydrogen embrittlement. On a molecular level, hydrogen atoms can infiltrate the crystalline structure of most metals, making them brittle and prone to sudden, catastrophic failure. In an atmosphere saturated with the element, conventional steel would turn to powder. Add to that the presence of corrosive chemicals like ammonia, and the list of viable traditional materials shrinks to zero. This forces a complete reimagining of what building materials even are. Researchers at the frontiers of nanotechnology, like those working on concepts for space elevators or deep-sea probes, look toward allotropes of carbon. Imagine a structural beam not cast or forged, but grown from a lattice of carbon nanotubes, each one 100 times stronger than steel at a fraction of the weight. Envision an insulating layer not of foam, but of graphene aerogel, a material so light it can balance on a dandelion seed yet capable of withstanding immense pressure and extreme thermal shifts. These are not mere upgrades, they are paradigm shifts in physical substance. The manufacturing challenge, however, is staggering. We cannot ship skyscrapers worth of carbon nanotubes from Earth. The only viable path is in situ resource utilization, harvesting the raw atoms from the sky itself. The atmosphere contains carbon, silicon, and other elements. Future processing platforms, perhaps floating in comma zones, would act like refineries, using advanced catalysis and atomic layer deposition to pull these elements from the air and assemble them into pristine, molecularly perfect building blocks. This suggests a city that grows organically from its environment, its structures 3D printed or even biologically assembled from atmospheric feedstock. This leads to an even more radical idea: materials that are not just inert but alive in their functionality. The city's outer skin could be a smart composite, embedded with networks of microscopic sensors and actuators. When a sensor detects an incoming microburst of particularly corrosive chemicals, that section of the hull could subtly alter its surface chemistry, becoming non-reactive. If a hairline fracture begins to form from constant stress, capillaries within the material could release healing agents that polymerize, sealing the wound autonomously. The city would possess a form of immune system, constantly self-monitoring and repairing. This transforms our view of architecture from something static to something dynamic and responsive. The quest for unearthly materials is not just about solving a strength problem. It is the key that unlocks the city's final form. If you can grow strong, smart, and self-repairing structures from the sky itself, then the very shape of your habitat is freed from ancient constraints. The design is no longer a compromise with material limits. It becomes a pure expression of function within the eternal storm. The city's form must become an extension of the sky itself, a fluid sculpture shaped by perpetual wind. This architectural philosophy abandons the rigid grids of terrestrial cities, embracing instead the principles of biomimicry and fluid dynamics. The goal is not to dominate the environment, but to harmonize with it, creating structures that are aerodynamic, modular, and resilient. Visionary architects and concept artists, like those who envision the cloud city of Bespin, guide our imagination toward forms that seem grown rather than built. Think of a flock of giant, luminous jellyfish drifting in a deep ocean current, or a network of interconnected orbital rings, each segment capable of independent movement yet part of a greater whole. The primary design influence is the wind itself. Buildings will not present flat walls to the gale, but streamlined, teardrop profiles that allow the 400-mile-per-hour currents to slip smoothly around them, minimizing drag and structural stress. This creates an organic, flowing cityscape where every tower and bridge is oriented along the prevailing atmospheric streams, making the metropolis appear as a natural feature of the gas giants' weather patterns. This leads to three core design tenets essential for survival. First is decentralization. A single, monolithic city is a single point of catastrophic failure. Instead, the habitat would be a constellation of smaller, interconnected modules or districts. Each module is a self-contained neighborhood with its own backup life support and power, linked to others by flexible, pressurized transit tubes. If one module is critically damaged, it can be sealed off and evacuated, while the rest of the city continues to function. Second is redundancy, which weaves a safety net into every layer of existence. From duplicate atmospheric processors in every district to multiple, independent communication networks, no critical system relies on a single component. The third tenet is vertical zoning. Without traditional ground, the city organizes itself in layers. The uppermost levels, closest to the void, might house the main observation decks, communication arrays, and solar collection fields, shielded by transparent, radiation-resistant domes. The central bands become the primary living zones, with residential areas, communal spaces, and vertical hydroponic farms stacked within vast, pressurized cylinders. Deeper down, closer to the warmer atmospheric layers, you would find heavy industry, fusion reactor plants, and the main atmospheric processing facilities, where the raw stuff of the sky is refined into breathable air, water, and building materials. Living within such an enclosed, cloud-bound world presents profound social and psychological considerations. There is no horizon, no unchanging ground, only an endless, beautiful, and potentially monotonous vista of swirling clouds and eternal storms. To prevent a sense of claustrophobic detachment, architecture must deliberately foster connection, both to the outside environment and to each other. Central observation decks become more than tourist attractions. They are vital communal hearths. Imagine a vast, transparent dome where citizens gather to watch the eternal ballet of ammonia cirrus swirling in pastel bands, lit by the soft glow of the distant sun or the crackling dance of planet-wide orrery. These visual connections to the majestic, terrifying outside are crucial for mental well-being, a constant reminder of the incredible world they inhabit. Internally, the design must create a sense of shared ground where none physically exists. This could mean designing grand, interior atriums that stretch through multiple levels, filled with cultivated gardens and artificial streams, creating a communal park that serves as the city's symbolic heart. Transportation tubes might be transparent, allowing for a constant, flowing view of the city's internal activity, fostering a sense of collective life. The architecture itself becomes the shared ground, a carefully crafted interior landscape that encourages community interaction and provides a stable, reassuring counterpoint to the dynamic chaos outside. How do you build a society when the very concept of land is absent? You build it around shared resources, mutual dependence, and breathtaking shared views. This focus on crafting a livable, enclosed biosphere pushes our planning to its most critical test, for every breath of air and every drop of water must be meticulously reclaimed and recycled in a perfect closed loop. The air you breathe is a meticulously calculated loan. Within the sealed sky city, there is no natural replenishment, no vast planetary biosphere to absorb waste and release fresh oxygen. Every molecule of water, every breath of air, every scrap of organic material exists within a closed, hyper-engineered loop. This transforms the entire metropolis into what systems engineers call a technosphere, a city-scale life support system of staggering complexity where biology and technology fuse into a single, living machine. Specialists in closed ecological life support systems, the kind designed for multi-year missions to Mars, provide the blueprint, but here the challenge is magnified 1,000-fold in both scale and permanence. Primary cycles are threefold: air, water, and biomass, and each must operate with near-perfect efficiency. For air revitalization, vast transparent tubes run through the city, not carrying people, but cultivating dense, emerald-green streams of genetically tailored algae. These bioreactors are the city's lungs, using energy from tuned growth lamps to consume carbon dioxide exhaled by the population and produce fresh oxygen, while also generating a protein-rich biomass that becomes a base for food production. Atmospheric processors constantly scrub trace toxins and balance nitrogen levels, ensuring the air remains not just breathable but invigorating. Water is the system's precious blood, and it is harvested from two primary sources. Condensation units collect the humidity from the city's own atmosphere, the moisture from breath, transpiration from plants, and even cooking. More ingeniously, they can tap the gas giants' own upper cloud decks, deploying collector arrays to process atmospheric water vapor and ammonia, breaking them down into hydrogen for fuel and pure, distilled water for the city's veins. Every drop is tracked, filtered through advanced membranes, and returned to the cycle. Nothing is truly discarded. Organic waste from homes and agricultural sectors is not flushed away, but fed into pyrolysis chambers, high-temperature ovens that operate in an oxygen-free environment. This process doesn't burn the waste, but thermally breaks it down, converting it into a sterile, carbon-rich biochar that can be used to enrich the soils of the hydroponic farms, completing the nutrient loop. This constant reclamation turns what was once refuse into a fundamental resource, a cornerstone of survival. The agricultural heart of the city would be a series of vast, multi-level domes, more biodiversity arc than simple farm. Rows of hydroponic and aeroponic trays grow staple crops, their roots misted with nutrient-rich solutions under precise spectra of light. But the lessons from projects like Biosphere 2 on Earth are stark. A closed system is fragile. To ensure dietary health and psychological well-being, these domes must cultivate an astonishing variety of plants, from fruit trees and vegetables to flowering species, creating spaces that are as much for community and tranquility as for food production. The sight and smell of green, growing things under a simulated sky becomes a profound psychological anchor, a living connection to a concept of nature redefined. The balance is perpetually delicate. A single crop blight or a malfunction in a water reclamation filter could send destabilizing ripples through the entire technosphere. Therefore, a network of thousands of sensors monitors the chemical composition of the air, the nutrient levels in the water, and the health of every major plant cohort. Artificial intelligence models predict stresses and automatically adjust growing conditions, divert resources, or initiate quarantine protocols. The city must possess a kind of metabolic awareness, constantly diagnosing and healing itself. Mastering this self-contained world is the final, non-negotiable prerequisite for life, but it frames the ultimate human question. What kind of society emerges when your entire existence, from the air in your lungs to the food on your plate, depends on the flawless function of an engineered ecosystem and the conscientious participation of every single citizen? This profound environmental reality would reshape the human soul in ways we can only begin to fathom. What does it do to the human psyche to live an entire life without ever feeling solid ground underfoot, where the sky above is also a deadly abyss below? The hardware of survival is meaningless without the software of society, the intricate web of culture, psychology, and community that turns a habitat into a home. Insights from psychologists who study teams in extreme isolation, like crews in Antarctic stations or on long submarine patrols, reveal that the greatest dangers are often not physical but social. Cohesion is not a bonus, it is a life support system. In a sky city, every individual's well-being is irrevocably tied to the conscientious actions of their neighbors, fostering a culture of radical interdependence. You cannot have a reckless citizen in a world where a single hull breach or a failure to follow recycling protocols endangers everyone. This necessity likely births new social contracts, where citizenship is earned through contribution and maintained through a shared ethos of stewardship. Governance could evolve into a form of participatory technocracy, where those with expertise in atmospheric systems, life support, and energy distribution hold significant advisory roles, but ultimate authority remains deeply communal, perhaps managed through decentralized digital councils. The concept of leaving, of simply walking away into a wilderness, does not exist. This permanence and total reliance could forge incredibly strong social bonds, but it also raises the specter of new social stratifications. Would a hierarchy emerge based on one's proximity to the city's stable core, or on the technical skill required to maintain the most critical systems? The potential for a class divide between engineers and artists, or between those who work the outer atmospheric processes and those who manage the internal biospheres, is a tension this society would have to consciously design against from its inception. To maintain mental equilibrium, the architecture of experience becomes as vital as the architecture of the city itself. Simulated environments and controlled virtual reality would provide essential psychological relief, offering citizens access to experiences utterly foreign to their reality, like walking in a forest, feeling sand on a beach, or climbing a mountain. These are not mere entertainments, they are therapeutic necessities, a way to satisfy deep-seated human needs for varied sensory input and a connection to terrestrial heritage. More importantly, the physical design of the city must actively combat the sense of claustrophobic enclosure. Grand interior commons take on a sacred role. Imagine vast atriums stretching the height of multiple districts, filled with cultivated groves of trees, flowing water features, and artificial sunlight that cycles through a 24-hour rhythm. These are the town squares and central parks, the shared ground that the environment denies. They are spaces for community gathering, celebration, and quiet reflection, designed to foster chance encounters and strengthen the social fabric. From this unique existence, entirely new forms of culture and expression would inevitably blossom. Art and music might draw inspiration from the ever-shifting cloud forms, the hypnotic dance of orrery, and the deep, resonant frequencies of the planet's own magnetic song. Navigation, once based on stars or landmarks, would become an art of reading atmospheric pressure gradients and cloud-top formations. Mythology would not be about earth and sky, but about layers and currents. Great storms like Jupiter's Great Red Spot might be personified as eternal, capricious deities or revered as ancient natural wonders. Festivals could mark the atmospheric seasons, celebrating the passage of a major storm front or the alignment of the moons in the sky above the clouds. Language itself would evolve, rich with terms for types of cloud shear, qualities of light filtered through ammonia crystals, and states of buoyancy, words that have no direct translation for those who live on a solid planet. Understanding this intricate social fabric, woven from necessity, psychology, and creativity, is the final key. It completes the portrait of a viable civilization. Only now, with a clear vision of how people could live and thrive in the clouds, can we ask the ultimate pragmatic question. Why would anyone go to such unimaginable effort? What powerful economic engine could possibly justify building a city in a hurricane? The ultimate justification for this cloud-bound civilization lies not in philosophy, but in economics, in the cold calculus of resources so valuable they redefine the very idea of wealth. Gas giants are not merely planets, they are the ultimate resource nodes in a future interplanetary economy. Floating banks of capital that make the staggering investment in a sky city not just plausible but potentially inevitable. Economic futurists and pioneers in space resource utilization, like those advocating for asteroid mining, point to a fundamental principle: the highest profits come from accessing what is scarce everywhere else. A floating metropolis becomes the most advanced offshore platform in history, its purpose to harvest not oil, but elements and conditions that simply do not exist in accessible form on terrestrial worlds. The primary industry would be isotopic harvesting. Within that vast sea of hydrogen, there exist rare and potent variants. Deuterium, a heavy form of hydrogen, is a key fuel for the nuclear fusion reactors that would power the city and perhaps entire fleets of starships. But an even more prized commodity is helium-3, an isotope incredibly scarce on Earth but thought to be more abundant in the outer solar system, swept into gas giant atmospheres by the solar wind over eons. Helium-3 is the holy grail of fusion fuel, promising cleaner, more efficient reactions with minimal radioactive byproduct. Mining it would not involve picks and shovels, but sophisticated atmospheric processing. Imagine vast, automated factories like floating refineries, deploying arrays of scoop drones that filter the upper atmosphere, concentrating these precious isotopes for collection. Deeper dive probes built to withstand crushing pressures might venture into lower layers to tap richer deposits, sending harvested material aloft in buoyant cargo pods. Beyond fuel, the environment itself becomes a unique industrial forge. The extreme pressure and temperature gradients between atmospheric layers create conditions impossible to replicate in any terrestrial laboratory. These could enable the synthesis of exotic materials, ultra-strong alloys, or perfect crystalline structures for advanced electronics. Pharmaceutical research could flourish here, using the unique chemistry to develop new compounds or catalyze reactions that are too unstable or slow in Earth's gentle environment. The city becomes a factory for the impossible, producing high-value, low-volume commodities that are worth transporting across the vast gulf of space. The logistics of this trade are as visionary as the extraction. Finished products, whether canisters of isotopic fuel or vials of rare pharmaceuticals, cannot simply be loaded onto a rocket from a launch pad. The solution likely involves a combination of technologies. High-altitude shuttlecraft designed for atmospheric flight could ferry cargo to a waiting orbital station. More elegantly, the city might deploy a space tether, a long, incredibly strong cable extending from its highest point toward the edge of space. Electromagnetic vehicles could ride this tether up and down, transferring cargo to and from orbit with minimal energy expenditure, like a celestial elevator connecting the cloud factory to the interplanetary trade routes. One could compare this to an offshore oil rig, but the analogy quickly breaks down. This platform operates in an environment infinitely more remote and hostile, and its product is not a commodity to be burned, but the very keys to a higher energy future. Yet there is another, more profound export possibility: scientific discovery itself. The city is a permanent, unparalleled research station perched inside a dynamic planetary system. The data gathered on atmospheric physics, fluid dynamics, magnetospheric interactions, and exotic chemistry would be priceless, advancing our fundamental understanding of the universe. This knowledge could be beamed back to Earth, traded to lunar colonies, or sold to other spacefaring factions, making the city a nexus of intellectual capital. This economic model, whether based on physical resources or pure knowledge, directly shapes the city's soul and its place in the wider world. A mining colony funded by external corporations would have a very different culture and governance than an independent research commune or a strategic fuel depot operated by a planetary alliance. The flow of wealth and the source of authority determine who makes the rules in the clouds. This leads us to the final, inevitable question of power and sovereignty. When your home is a man-made island in an alien sky, who truly holds the keys to the kingdom, and what happens when competing interests descend from the stars above? The legal status of a floating city is a question without precedent, debated in theoretical journals and perhaps one day in a pressurized conference room with a view of Jupiter's swirling bands. Our existing framework for space, the Foundational Outer Space Treaty, was written for a different era, focusing on celestial bodies like moons and asteroids. It explicitly prohibits national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, but scholars of space law point out a fascinating gray area. The treaty is largely silent on the status of a planet's atmosphere. Can you claim a piece of the sky? This ambiguity creates a legal vacuum where new forms of sovereignty could emerge. One likely model is the corporate enclave, where a consortium of Earth-based nations or a mega-corporation funds the city's construction in exchange for exclusive resource extraction rights, governing it as a private, chartered territory, much like a company town or an offshore platform. Another is the scientific preserve, established under an international treaty and administered like Antarctica, dedicated purely to research with strict environmental protocols. The most radical possibility is the independent city-state, a self-governing polity that declares its autonomy, crafting its own legal identity from the clouds up. Each model carries profound implications. A corporate charter prioritizes efficiency and profit, potentially at the expense of citizen rights. A scientific preserve might be highly regulated but lack long-term cultural vitality. An independent city-state would face the immense challenge of securing recognition and survival without a terrestrial patron. The city's relationship with Earth would be defined by this choice, ranging from a distant corporate subsidiary to a wary diplomatic partner, or even a defiant new nation seeking a seat at the interplanetary table. This directly influences the most pressing practical concern: how are laws made and enforced in a place where every infraction could threaten collective survival? Governance would need to be adaptive and transparent. A direct corporate administration might impose a strict utilitarian code focused on productivity and system maintenance. A democratic commune born from a shared pioneer ethos might develop a participatory model where major decisions are put to digital referendum, with councils of technical experts advising on matters of life support and engineering. The legal code itself would be a unique document, addressing crimes that do not exist on Earth. What is the penalty for atmospheric trespass, for tampering with a primary buoyancy control system, or for illegally venting waste into the shared atmospheric processing stream? Disputes over resource claims between different city districts or with external mining drones would require a dedicated arbitration system. Enforcement presents its own unique puzzle. A traditional police force is of little use if the crime involves hacking the atmospheric sensors. Security might be less about armed officers and more about sophisticated cyber defense and a culture of mutual accountability, where every citizen is both a beneficiary and a guardian of the systems that keep them alive. This evokes historical parallels to semi-autonomous trading posts like the Hanseatic League, which govern themselves through shared commercial codes across distant ports, or to charter cities that operated under special legal agreements. But here, the isolation is absolute and the stakes are existential. This leads to the inevitable question of defense. Would a sky city need a military? In a purely corporate or scientific model, security might be contracted, a private force protecting assets. An independent city-state, however, sitting atop immense resource wealth, would be a tempting target. It cannot build walls or fortify a border. Its perimeter is the open sky. Defense would likely be non-kinetic and asymmetrical. The primary strategy would be deterrence through critical dependency, making an attack on the city an act of profound self-sabotage for any entity that relies on its fuel or pharmaceuticals. Tactical defenses could involve sophisticated jamming of guidance systems, the use of automated drone swarms to intercept incoming craft, or even the threat of controlled atmospheric manipulation, steering a minor storm into a flight path. The city's greatest shield might be its sheer, daunting inhospitability to outsiders. Any invading force would have to master the same horrific environment just to reach the front door. This intricate dance of law, autonomy, and security defines the city's place in the solar system, but it all exists to serve the people within. How do you move through a city that has no streets, and what does a day in the life of a cloud citizen actually look like? The morning commute in a sky city is a silent glide through a pressurized tube with a view of the eternal storm. Transportation here is not an afterthought. It is the circulatory system of a living organism, moving people, goods, and data through an ocean of gas where a single misstep could mean being lost forever. The network splits into two distinct but interconnected spheres: the delicate ballet of intra-city movement and the robust, long-range journeys that connect the city to the wider solar system. For moving within the city's constellation of modules, the primary arteries are likely transparent transit tubes. These are not simple tunnels, but dynamically stabilized conduits, their flexible structures allowing them to sway gently with the city's movements. Inside, magnetic levitation trams or individual pod cars whisk citizens between residential spires, agricultural domes, and industrial sectors, all while offering breathtaking, if unsettling, vistas of the cloudscape outside. For vertical travel across the city's layered zones, high-speed elevators move through central utility spines, while for shorter, more personalized trips, small aerial vehicles might navigate designated airways within large interior atriums, like drones in a cavernous sky. Leaving the protective embrace of the main city modules requires a different class of vehicle entirely. Here, the work of aerospace engineers designing concepts for the thick atmosphere of Venus becomes incredibly relevant. Flight in a dense, hydrogen-rich environment obeys different rules than on Earth. The air itself is more buoyant, allowing for novel and energy-efficient designs. Intercity shuttles might resemble giant, graceful manta rays, with vast, slow-moving wings that generate tremendous lift with minimal effort, or hybrid airships that use a combination of buoyant gas and aerodynamic propulsion to travel between distant floating outposts. These craft would dock at external ports, complex structures extending from the city's hull like the roots of a floating tree, equipped with multiple redundant airlocks and magnetic coupling systems to ensure a secure seal against the screaming winds outside. Every arrival and departure is choreographed by a central traffic control AI, a system fused with the city's weather prediction network. This intelligence plots paths through lanes of relatively calm air, avoiding sudden jet streams or turbulent shear layers, turning a potentially deadly journey into a calculated, smooth transit. For the most critical journey of all, the ascent to orbit, the vehicles must be truly robust. Larger craft, perhaps resembling sleek, heavily shielded rockets with atmospheric maneuvering surfaces, would make the climb from the floating spaceports up through the thinning atmosphere and into the void. Their launch is not a violent explosion of thrust from a static pad, but a more controlled, gradual ascent, using the dense lower air for initial lift before engaging main engines. The infrastructure for this is monumental. Orbital tether concepts, while challenging, represent an elegant solution, a space elevator rooted in the clouds. A ribbon of ultra-strong material extending tens of thousands of kilometers from the city could allow electromagnetic climbers to ferry cargo and passengers to a waiting station in high orbit, exchanging the immense energy cost of rocket flight for a steady trickle of electrical power. This establishes the city not as an isolated outpost, but as a vital port in the interplanetary trade network, a bustling dock where harvested isotopes and manufactured wonders begin their journey to Mars, the asteroid belt, or Earth. Yet a physical connection is only half the story. A city adrift in the outer solar system would be paralyzed without a constant, clear stream of data. Communication is the invisible lifeline tethering the cloud metropolis to the rest of humanity. Sending a signal across billions of kilometers of empty space to Earth is an exercise in patience and precision. The primary method would be a network of powerful laser communication arrays mounted on the city's highest, most stable points. These systems encode information into tightly focused beams of light, offering vastly higher data rates than traditional radio waves, allowing for not just text and voice, but high-definition video feeds, complex scientific data, and cultural broadcast. To maintain this link as the planet rotates, a constellation of relay satellites would be placed in orbit around the gas giant, forming a local network that always has a line of sight back to the inner solar system. This constant data stream carries everything from personal messages home to vital system diagnostics, from new scientific discoveries to the latest entertainment from Earth, fighting the profound psychological distance with a river of shared light. This flow of information is what truly prevents the Sky City from becoming a lonely island, integrating its triumphs and struggles into the ongoing story of our species. But this entire breathtaking enterprise, from the transit tubes to the laser links, exists within a system of unimaginable fragility. A message from Earth takes over 30 minutes to cross the void and reach a city orbiting Jupiter, and another 30 for a reply to travel home. This is not a minor inconvenience, it is a fundamental reshaping of human connection. Real-time conversation with Earth is a physical impossibility, turning every exchange into a thoughtful, delayed letter carved into beams of light. Maintaining a cultural and informational lifeline across this staggering gulf becomes one of the city's most critical and delicate infrastructures. Engineers from initiatives like NASA, a deep space network, understand the immense challenge of talking across the solar system. Their massive radio dish antennas, scattered across the world, strain to catch the faint whispers from distant probes. For a thriving civilization, this whisper is not enough. The city would need a far more robust system, built around powerful laser communication arrays. Think of them as interstellar lighthouses encoding vast streams of data, from personal video messages to complex engineering schematics, into tightly focused beams of coherent light. These lasers offer data rates thousands of times faster than radio, capable of sending entire libraries of information in a single transmission window. To aim these beams with pinpoint accuracy across billions of kilometers, the city would rely on a constellation of relay satellites in stable orbits around the gas giant, forming a local network that always has a line of sight back to the inner planets. Even with this advanced hardware, data itself must be ruthlessly optimized. Sophisticated compression protocols strip away every redundant bit, ensuring that the precious bandwidth is reserved for the most vital information, a constant triage of knowledge flowing between worlds. The societal impact of this built-in delay is profound and inescapable. News from Earth arrives not as a breaking alert, but as history, a report on events that concluded weeks ago. This forces a radical cultural self-sufficiency. The city cannot wait for Earth's guidance in a crisis, or for its cultural trends to slowly drift across space. Local governance must be completely autonomous, capable of making swift, final decisions on matters of safety, justice, and resource allocation. From this necessity, a distinct sky culture would inevitably blossom. It would generate its own news cycles focused on local atmospheric events and engineering milestones. Its entertainment, art, and social networks would evolve independently, shaped by the unique psychology of cloud-bound life, creating a shared identity that is both derived from Earth and fundamentally separate from it. This makes the weekly arrival of the major data packet from Earth a monumental cultural event. Imagine the entire city pausing as the latest compressed burst of terrestrial news, scientific journals, and popular media is decrypted and released. It would be like the arrival of a mail ship in a 19th century port colony, a tangible, eagerly awaited connection to the ancestral home, analyzed and discussed for days until the next packet arrives. This isolation demands robust contingency plans. What happens during a solar flare that severs the laser link for days or weeks? Emergency protocols would activate, switching to backup, lower bandwidth radio channels and relying on cached data. For truly critical updates, the city might even dispatch dedicated data cache ships, small, fast vessels pre-loaded with information to physically carry news to and from other outposts, a return to a kind of informational Pony Express. This profound communication lag is not just a technical hurdle. It is the very ingredient that would catalyze the birth of a new branch of human civilization. It forces a degree of intellectual and cultural independence that makes the Sky City not an outpost, but a sovereign node in a growing interplanetary network. This realization shifts our perspective from the dream of building such a place to the urgent, pragmatic question of when. Given the staggering scale of these challenges in engineering, social design, and sheer cosmic logistics, what is a realistic timeline for turning this vision from a breathtaking thought experiment into a blueprint for our future? Charting a path from our current reality to a city in the clouds requires mapping a journey that spans not just space, but centuries of human progress. This is not a sudden leap, but a gradual, phased ascent, each step building on the lessons of the last, much like the incremental development that transformed the first satellite into the International Space Station. The initial phase is already underway, though its destination is far more distant. Robotic probes like the Juno spacecraft are our remote scouts, gathering the essential data on wind speeds, atmospheric composition, and radiation belts. The next logical step would be more specialized atmospheric drones, designed not just to fly by, but to descend into the upper cloud layers, sampling the chemical soup and testing materials in that corrosive environment. These would be followed by sample return missions, where automated craft plunge into the habitable band, collect filtered atmospheric gases and particulates, and launch a return capsule back to orbit for analysis. These missions would answer the most pressing questions, pinpointing the exact pressure and temperature of the most stable layer and confirming the presence of harvestable resources. Concurrently, the technology for living in the sky would be developed much closer to home. Manned research stations floating in Earth's own upper atmosphere in the stratosphere would serve as invaluable analogs. These high-altitude platforms, perhaps large, buoyant habitats, would allow engineers and psychologists to study long-term life in an enclosed, isolated environment with a thin, panoramic view of the void, solving problems of closed-loop life support and group dynamics in a place where rescue is still possible. Strategic planners at agencies focused on the next 100 years, like those within NASA's long-duration mission offices, often frame such progress in generational milestones. The first monumental leap would be a long-duration crewed mission into a gas giant's upper atmosphere. This would not be a city, but a ship, a heavily shielded and fortified vessel designed to hold a small crew for a year or more, riding the jet streams and conducting hands-on research from within the storm itself. Following that, we would see the deployment of a permanent, automated research platform, an unmanned station that maintains position for decades, a steady beacon of data, and a testbed for autonomous systems. The construction of the first habitable module, a pressurized structure capable of hosting a rotating crew for extended periods, would mark the birth of the first true foothold. Expansion from that single module into a networked cluster, and eventually a self-sustaining city, would then become a matter of scaling up the manufacturing and life support systems that had already been proven. Each of these stages hinges on specific critical technological breakthroughs. Before any crewed mission, we would need radical advances in radiation shielding, perhaps using active magnetic fields or new composite materials. Sustainable, compact fusion power is a non-negotiable prerequisite for a permanent presence, moving from experimental reactors to reliable, city-scale engines. The industrial-scale manufacturing of miracle materials like graphene or carbon nanotubes in space, using processed asteroidal or atmospheric resources, would need to become a routine operation. An illustrative parallel is the step-by-step assembly of the International Space Station, a project that took over a decade and the cooperation of multiple nations. Building in a Jovian storm would be that endeavor multiplied in complexity 1,000-fold, with every bolt and panel having to withstand an environment of unimaginable ferocity. This long road is littered with potential showstoppers, single points of failure that could derail the vision entirely. A fundamental, insurmountable problem with hydrogen embrittlement, proving that no material can long survive the atmosphere, would be a definitive end. The failure to achieve practical fusion power would leave the city without an adequate energy heart. Perhaps most critically, a societal loss of will or a reallocation of resources back to terrestrial concerns could stall the project for generations, turning it into a permanent dream. This realistic appraisal tempers our wonder with pragmatism, reminding us that such a future is a choice, one requiring sustained ambition across centuries. Yet, even within this grounded framework, the most visionary thinkers are already looking beyond the first city, to concepts that push the very idea of a cloud-bound civilization to its absolute limits. The ultimate extension of this vision is not a city, but a world. Beyond clusters of interconnected modules lies the most staggering concept of all, the Aerostat megastructure, a single artificial continent floating permanently in the alien sky. This is no longer urban planning, it is planetary engineering on a scale that redefines the word ambition. Think of a hollow sphere, a rigid shell the size of a small moon, suspended within the gas giant's atmosphere. Futurists and theoretical physicists have long played with such ideas, from Freeman Dyson's famous thought experiment about capturing a star's energy to more recent concepts of shell worlds or bolospheres. The principle is audacious yet mechanically elegant. The structure would enclose a vast volume of Earth-like air, and the immense external pressure of the surrounding atmosphere would act as a natural support, pressing inward to hold the entire sphere together against the internal pressure of its own habitable atmosphere. It would be like a deep-sea submarine, but one that contains forests, lakes, and cities within its hull, using the entire weight of a planetary atmosphere as its structural scaffolding. The material required for such a shell defies our current imagination. It would need to be phenomenally strong yet lightweight, capable of spanning thousands of kilometers without a single critical weak point. Scientists and engineers debate whether any material, even perfected carbon nanotubes or theorized metallic hydrogen composites, could achieve the necessary tensile strength-to-weight ratio. The construction process itself is almost incomprehensible, likely involving automated factories in orbit assembling the shell piece by piece over centuries, a project for a civilization with the patience and resources of gods. Within this sealed Eden, the scale changes everything. You could engineer a complete, independent biosphere on a level impossible for a city, with continents of farmland, freshwater seas, and mountain ranges that exist only to create weather patterns. The megastructure would generate its own internal climate, with clouds forming under the artificial sky and rain watering the interior landscapes. The philosophical shift is profound. This is not adapting to an alien environment. It is rejecting it entirely, choosing to carry a perfect, crafted replica of a world within the heart of a storm. It represents the final divorce from planetary evolution, the ultimate act of human will to design existence from the atom up. Could such a thing ever be more than a dazzling thought experiment? The laws of physics as we understand them do not explicitly forbid it, but the engineering hurdles are so vast they border on the mythological. Yet, considering this extreme helps crystallize the most profound questions lurking behind the entire endeavor. What responsibility comes with the power to build a world? When you create an entire biosphere and a society from scratch, who decides what kind of world it should be? The pursuit of such a megastructure forces us to confront not just what we can build, but what we should build and for whom. Building a world within another world forces us to confront a question of cosmic responsibility. The act of constructing a floating city, or especially a vast megastructure, is not a neutral engineering feat. It is an intervention into a planetary system that has evolved over billions of years. This raises profound ethical dilemmas that extend far beyond technical feasibility, touching on our deepest philosophies about life, preservation, and our place in the cosmos. At the heart of this lies the principle of planetary protection, a framework designed to prevent biological contamination between worlds. For decades, it has guided missions to Mars, ensuring our probes do not carry Earth microbes that could compromise the search for native life. But a gas giant presents a far more complex scenario. Its atmosphere is not a sterile surface, but a dynamic, chemically rich fluid, a potential habitat for life as we do not know it. Astrobiologists speculate that within the temperate, stable layers of clouds, complex organic chemistry could give rise to floating microbial communities, or even more exotic, buoyant organisms that feed on atmospheric chemicals. The introduction of a city with its heat emissions, industrial byproducts, and potential for accidental release of terrestrial organisms could irrevocably alter or destroy such a fragile, undiscovered biosphere. The ethical question is stark. Do we have the right to alter another planet before we truly understand it? Environmental philosophers like Dr. James Lovelock, who formulated the Gaia hypothesis, might argue that a planet's entire environment functions as a complex, self-regulating system. Inserting a massive, heat-radiating structure could have unintended climatic consequences, perhaps disrupting cloud formation patterns or atmospheric circulation on a local or even global scale. The moral weight of this is amplified by the sheer alien majesty of the setting. A gas giant is not just another rock, it is a majestic, swirling work of art on a planetary scale, a natural wonder that has inspired awe for as long as humans have looked at the sky. To see it as merely a resource depot is for many a profound failure of cosmic stewardship. This perspective challenges the assumption that expansion is an inherent good, framing it instead as a potential form of astrocolonialism, where the resources and spaces of other worlds are exploited without regard for their intrinsic value or potential to harbor their own stories. The debate mirrors current discussions about mining the moon or asteroids, but is intensified by the gas giant's dynamic, living atmosphere and its iconic place in our collective imagination. Yet, standing in opposition is the undeniable driver of human need and curiosity. Proponents of settlement argue that ethical responsibility extends to our own species as well, to ensuring our survival and advancement. If a gas giant's resources can provide clean, abundant energy for a growing interplanetary civilization, or serve as a refuge should catastrophe strike Earth, does our duty to our own future generations outweigh a precautionary principle regarding unknown potential life? Furthermore, they might contend that a carefully managed, minimal-footprint city, operating with strict containment protocols, represents a more ethical and sustainable model of expansion than the unchecked resource extraction that has often characterized human history. The settlers themselves would bear the heaviest moral burden, living with the daily knowledge that their existence is an experiment with profound stakes. They would be the guardians of this delicate boundary, tasked with maintaining perfect containment and monitoring their environment for any sign of impact. This responsibility would become a cornerstone of their culture, woven into their laws, their education, and their very identity. Their children, born in the clouds, would inherit not just a home but a covenant, a promise to tread lightly in a sky that is not truly their own. This ethical tension is the final, and perhaps most human, frontier in the vision of sky cities. It cannot be solved by equations or material science alone. It requires a dialogue between our ambition and our humility, between our drive to build and our duty to preserve. The decision to float a city in a gas giant's clouds would be a declaration of what we believe humanity's role in the universe ultimately should be: architects of new worlds, or careful students of a cosmos infinitely older and wiser than ourselves. This philosophical reckoning brings the entire vision into sharp, practical focus, forcing us to ask not just if we can build such a place, but under what guiding principles we would dare to try. The weight of these ethical questions is immense, yet history suggests it will not be the final word. Humanity has repeatedly embarked on journeys whose costs seem to dwarf their immediate rewards, driven by forces deeper than simple logic. To understand why we might one day build in the clouds, we must look past the blueprints and examine the engines of the human spirit that have always propelled us toward the horizon. Historians of exploration, like those who study the motivations behind the Age of Sail or the Apollo program, identify a recurring triad of drivers, a blend of survival, curiosity, and resource acquisition that transforms distant dreams into national projects. In the context of a gas giant, each of these takes on a new and powerful resonance. Survival is the most primal catalyst. A floating city represents the ultimate insurance policy, a self-sustaining arc far removed from any single point of failure on Earth or Mars. It is a hedge against planetary-scale catastrophe, whether natural or self-inflicted, ensuring that the thread of human consciousness is not severed by a disaster on our home world. This is not about abandoning Earth, but about guaranteeing that humanity becomes a multi-world species in the most profound sense, with a home in an environment utterly unlike any other. Then there is curiosity, the pure, burning desire to know. A permanent presence inside a gas giant is not just exploration, it is immersion. It is the difference between sending a robotic probe to sniff the atmosphere and living within its storms, feeling its rhythms, and directly observing processes that have been theoretical for centuries. The scientific knowledge gained about planetary formation, fluid dynamics, and exotic chemistry would be revolutionary, rewriting textbooks and likely spawning entirely new fields of study. The third driver is resource acquisition, the cold, strategic calculus of necessity. As discussed, the economic potential of isotopic fuels and unique industrial processes could fund entire interplanetary economies. This turns the vision from a costly experiment into a strategic investment, one that could secure energy independence for centuries and establish a cornerstone of trade for a spacefaring civilization. These classic motivations, however, may not be enough alone. The scale required demands something more, a collective will that transcends individual nations or corporations. This is where the concept of technological spin-offs becomes critical. The Apollo program gave us everything from advanced computing and materials science to cordless tools and water purification systems. The challenge of building a sky city would force breakthroughs in fusion power, closed-loop ecology, smart materials, and artificial intelligence, with countless applications that would flow back to improve life on Earth. The project could become a global cooperative endeavor, a unifying goal that inspires international collaboration on a scale rarely seen, offering a positive vision of the future that galvanizes generations. There is also an evolutionary argument proposed by thinkers like Konstantin Tsiolkovsky that an intelligent species driven to explore and expand is simply fulfilling its natural destiny, that stagnation on a single world is a precursor to decline. This frames the endeavor not as a choice but as an expression of a fundamental trait, and we cannot discount the driver of pure challenge, the mountain climber's reason, because it is there. The sheer audacity of the task of bending a hostile environment to our will and creating beauty and life within a perpetual hurricane speaks to a deep human need to test our limits and create meaning through monumental achievement. So which of these drivers is most compelling and which is most fragile? Survival is a powerful motivator, but it often requires an imminent threat to mobilize action. Curiosity is eternal, but can it secure trillions in funding? Resource acquisition is pragmatic, but it risks reducing the vision to a purely extractive corporate venture, potentially stripping it of its inspirational and ethical dimensions. Perhaps the most fragile driver is the hope for global cooperation, a noble ideal that has often fractured under the weight of earthly politics. Yet, it may also be the most essential, for only a coalition of nations, scientists, and dreamers could muster the patience and resources for a project measured in centuries, not electoral cycles. Understanding this complex web of motivation finally answers the question of who the key players in this future might be. It will not be a single entity, but a tapestry woven from the threads of visionary entrepreneurs, long-term government agencies, international scientific bodies, and the countless engineers, artists, and pioneers who are drawn not by what they can take, but by what they can build. They are driven by a mixture of fear, wonder, need, and pride, the same forces that have always launched ships into unknown seas. The first foundation stone of a sky city will not be laid by a single hand, but by a complex alliance of visionaries, each bringing a distinct piece of the puzzle. This unprecedented project demands a new model of creation, one that blends the patience of science, the daring of enterprise, and the stability of international accord. The most plausible architects emerge from three distinct realms, each with a legacy pointing toward the clouds. First are the national space agencies, organizations like NASA, the European Space Agency, and the China National Space Administration. Their role is foundational, providing the decades of basic planetary science, the deep understanding of atmospheric physics, and the long-term research into closed-loop life support and radiation shielding that corporate timelines cannot justify. They are the cartographers, meticulously mapping the dangerous yet potentially habitable bands within the gas giant's atmosphere. Next are the private aerospace giants, entities like SpaceX or Blue Origin, forged in a culture of rapid iteration and monumental risk. Their strength lies in drastically reducing the cost of access to space through reusable launch systems, and in pioneering the kind of ambitious, large-scale engineering projects that redefine what is possible. They would be the master builders, tasked with constructing the massive orbital infrastructure, the heavy lift vehicles for component delivery, and perhaps the revolutionary designs for atmospheric entry vehicles and floating platforms. Their approach is not to study the frontier indefinitely, but to industrialize it. The third player might be a new entity entirely, a dedicated international consortium formed specifically for this mega-project. This would be a coalition of nations, corporations, and scientific institutions, pooling capital, talent, and political will under a single charter, much like the partnership that built the International Space Station, but for a goal orders of magnitude more complex and distant. This structure could provide the enduring political and financial stability needed for a venture measured in generations, not quarterly reports. Industry analysts watching the commercialization of space point to a public-private partnership as the most likely path forward. In this model, government agencies fund the high-risk basic research and establish the initial robotic precursor missions, de-risking the environment for private investment. Corporations then compete to develop and operate the transportation and construction systems, driven by contracts and the potential for future resource rights. Finally, an international governing body oversees the long-term settlement, ensuring scientific access, environmental protocols, and fair use principles. This blend leverages the strengths of each: government funding for foundational science, corporate agility and risk-taking for execution, and international cooperation for shared cost and global legitimacy. To accelerate breakthroughs, we might see staged competitions inspired by the Ansari X Prize, which catalyzed private spaceflight. A series of grand challenges could be announced, offering substantial rewards for demonstrable achievements in key technologies, such as a fully functional, one-year demonstration of a closed-loop life support system for 10 people, or a material that can withstand simulated Jovian atmospheric conditions for a decade. This competitive spur could unlock innovations from unexpected quarters, from university labs to small startups, injecting fresh ideas into the monumental endeavor. Yet, coordinating such a diverse alliance is itself a monumental challenge. Conflicts are inevitable. Will the primary purpose of the first outpost be scientific research, as agencies might prefer, or resource prospecting and industrial testing, as corporate investors would demand? How are intellectual property rights handled for technologies developed in this unique environment? Who has jurisdiction in case of an accident or a dispute among crew members from different nations and corporate entities? The collaboration's true strength will not be revealed during the planning stages, but during the first major crisis. A construction delay that threatens a narrow launch window, a critical systems failure in the prototype habitat, or a serious disagreement on safety protocols will test the alliance's foundations. Success will depend on having conflict resolution mechanisms built into the partnership's charter from the very beginning, with clear lines of authority and a shared, unwavering commitment to the mission's ultimate survival above any single entity's agenda. This intricate dance of diplomacy and engineering suggests that the first citizens of the clouds may not be born on Earth at all, but will be selected from the finest minds and most resilient spirits this planetary alliance can muster. A rupture in the city's primary buoyancy network would not sound like an explosion, but a deep, resonant groan felt through the entire structure. In that moment, every theoretical risk becomes a visceral reality, and the city's survival shifts from a steady state to a desperate race against time. This is the ultimate test of the Sky City's design, a first major crisis unfolding in total isolation, where the nearest help is over 30 minutes away by laser signal and hours or even years by physical travel. To understand resilience, we must engage in scenario planning, a discipline used by risk management specialists for deep space missions and Antarctic bases, where they systematically imagine the worst to build systems that can endure it. These potential catastrophes fall into four brutal categories: technical failures within the city's own machinery, biological emergencies like a pathogen in the closed biosphere, social fractures from conflict or governance collapse, and external threats such as an impact from a passing comet fragment. Each scenario probes a different vulnerability, but they all share one terrifying commonality: the city must save itself. Let us walk through one detailed possibility: a cascading power failure during a planet-wide superstorm. It begins not with a single mistake, but with a chain of improbable events. A micrometeoroid, a speck of dust traveling at tremendous speed, pierces a primary magnetic coil in one of the distributed fusion reactors. Automatic systems seal the breach, but the reactor must safely shut down, dropping a significant portion of the power grid offline. At that precise moment, a colossal storm front, detected but underestimated by the predictive models, engulfs the city. The sudden, violent shear winds strain the orientation thrusters, which now must work harder without full power, draining the emergency capacitor banks. The city begins a slow, uncontrolled drift, its dance with the storm now a stumble. Decision points arrive in rapid succession. Does the central AI reroute all remaining power to buoyancy control, sacrificing atmospheric processing and dimming the agricultural domes? Do human operators override it, prioritizing life support for the population centers, accepting a deeper descent into higher pressure? Every choice has a cost measured in atmosphere, heat, and time. The available resources are whatever is already within the city's hull. There is no cavalry. Success hinges on the absolute, non-negotiable necessity of redundant systems. The offline fusion reactor has a twin across the city, but bringing it to full output takes precious minutes. The strained thrusters have backups, but they were not designed for continuous operation at this intensity. This is where well-drilled emergency protocols transform panic into procedure. Teams trained for this exact simulation 100 times deploy to manual override stations. Engineers in pressure suits tethered to safety lines venture into the screaming wind of the external service decks to physically bypass damaged power conduits. Within the biosphere domes, technicians activate passive battery lights and begin the meticulous process of shifting critical food crops to survival mode, sacrificing yield for stability. The historical lesson of Apollo 13 is profoundly relevant here, where ground teams and astronauts used spare parts and pure ingenuity to devise a solution no one had ever rehearsed. In the Sky City, the ground team is on the other side of the solar system, their advice arriving an hour too late. The ingenuity must be local, immediate, and collective. Surviving such an ordeal does more than prove engineering concepts, it forges identity. In the aftermath, as power is restored and the city regains its station, the population emerges not just as citizens, but as veterans of a shared trial. The experience etches a new layer into their culture, a collective memory of vulnerability and competence that bonds them more tightly than any charter. It validates their social contract, proving that their radical interdependence is not a theory, but a lived and necessary truth. A society that overcomes its first great crisis looks toward the future with a hardened confidence, knowing that their home is not just a fragile bubble in the clouds, but a vessel that has been tested and found worthy. This hard-earned unity becomes the foundation for the next, even more expansive phase of their existence, where they look beyond mere survival to ask how they might shape the very sky around them. A single city is a marvel, but a civilization is a constellation. Beyond the survival of one floating metropolis lies a grander vision, a network of independent sky cities drifting in the atmospheres of Jupiter, Saturn, and perhaps Uranus or Neptune, each a unique jewel in the necklace of the outer solar system. This transforms the endeavor from a solitary outpost into the foundation of a new branch of human society, a truly multi-world species no longer bound to the surfaces of terrestrial planets. Political theorists who study federated systems, like the ancient Hanseatic League or modern supranational unions, see a model emerging, perhaps called the Jovian Commonwealth or the Saturnian League. This would not be a centralized empire, but a loose affiliation of sovereign city-states, bound by shared technology protocols, mutual defense pacts, and a common cultural heritage born from life inside the eternal storm. Their governance would be a masterpiece of decentralized coordination, where each city maintains absolute control over its internal affairs but collaborates on system-wide challenges, from standardizing communication frequencies to coordinating planetary-scale atmospheric research. The commerce that flows between these cloud-bound nations would be as unique as their environments. You cannot economically ship water or bulk ore across billions of kilometers of space. Instead, interplanetary trade focuses on three high-value streams: data, design, and discovery. The most precious cargo is information, vast libraries of atmospheric data, new genetic sequences for hardier crops, or breakthroughs in material science, transmitted via laser and verified through shared blockchain ledgers. Next are unique manufactured goods, items impossible to make anywhere else, like pharmaceuticals synthesized under extreme pressure or flawless crystals grown in the gas giant's magnetic field. Finally, there is the trade in biological and cultural material, curated genetic libraries for biosphere diversity, or immersive art experiences crafted from the sensory data of a Saturnian storm, exchanged as cultural ambassadors between worlds. This economic reality encourages profound cultural specialization. One city, floating in a relatively calm band of Saturn's atmosphere, might dedicate itself to the arts and advanced virtual reality, becoming a sanctuary for philosophers and creators who draw inspiration from the ring's celestial light show. Another, anchored in the more turbulent depths of Jupiter, could evolve into a powerhouse of heavy industry and fusion engineering, its citizens masters of harnessing raw atmospheric power. A third might be a pure scientific preserve, a silent monastery of sensors and intellect devoted solely to decoding the gas giant's deepest mysteries. This specialization is not a weakness but a source of collective strength, making each city an irreplaceable node in a resilient network. To coordinate this dispersed civilization, imagine an annual conclave of the clouds. Delegates from each city-state would not undertake the years-long journey in person, but would meet through sophisticated telepresence suites, their holographic forms debating in a shared virtual chamber that mimics a neutral sky. For the most critical diplomatic negotiations or cultural exchanges, representatives might travel on slow, fusion-powered arcs, vessels that are less like ships and more like moving monasteries, carrying news and nuance across the interstellar gulfs. These journeys themselves would become rites of passage and cultural epics, This expansive view forces our gaze beyond the familiar planets of our own solar system. If humanity can build a sustainable civilization in the violent skies of Jupiter, then the galaxy itself opens in a new way. Countless star systems harbor gas giants, many orbiting within the habitable zones of their suns. A species that masters life inside them is no longer searching for a perfect replica of Earth. It can settle in systems where no rocky, temperate world exists, turning what was once an obstacle into a home. The network of sky cities becomes a blueprint for a galactic diaspora, proving that life can thrive not just on worlds, but within them. This is the ultimate promise of the vision, a future where humanity is as comfortable in the storm as it once was on the savannah, a species forever changed by the sky it learned to call home. The principles forged in Jupiter's storms could one day echo around distant suns. Our galaxy is not just a scattering of stars, but a vast archipelago of worlds, and among the thousands of exoplanets we have discovered, gas giants are astonishingly common. From the searing hot Jupiters hugging their stars to the frigid cold Jupiters drifting in the outer dark, these colossal atmospheres represent a universal real estate, a potential habitat template that could be replicated across the cosmos. Exoplanet astronomers like Dr. Sarah Seeger, who pioneers methods to analyze alien atmospheres, suggest that while each world will have its own unique chemistry and dynamics, the fundamental physics of floating within a dense atmospheric layer remains a constant. A civilization that masters this technology in our own solar system is not solving a local problem. It is developing a universal skill set, a blueprint for life that could work on countless worlds where no Earth-like planet exists at all. This transforms the vision from a singular achievement into a potential common pathway, a recurring chapter in the story of intelligence across the galaxy. The journey to deploy such a city, however, stretches the concept of distance to its breaking point. Reaching a gas giant in another star system is not a matter of years, but of centuries or millennia aboard a generation ship, a self-contained world voyaging through the endless night. In this context, the Sky City takes on a new and vital role, not as a final destination, but as the ultimate way station. After an epic voyage, the arrival at a target star system presents a critical challenge. Where do you find the resources to rebuild, refuel, and expand without a welcoming terrestrial planet? A gas giant provides the answer. The generation ship or its advanced scout probes could use the principles developed at home to construct the first floating platform, tapping the alien atmosphere for hydrogen, helium, and other volatiles to manufacture fuel, replenish life support, and grow their presence. The city becomes a beachhead in a new solar system, a bridge between the interstellar voyage and the settlement of moons, asteroids, or other planets. It is the first breath of a civilization taking root in foreign skies. This leads to a fascinating possibility for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. If such cities are a logical step for a spacefaring species, could we detect them? Astronomers searching for technosignatures, the signs of advanced technology beyond Earth, might look for unusual energy emissions or chemical imbalances in the atmospheres of distant gas giants. A metropolis floating in those clouds would likely radiate waste heat at specific infrared wavelengths, a subtle but persistent anomaly against the cold backdrop of space. Its industrial processes might leave artificial chemical traces, like complex fluorocarbons or an unexpected abundance of certain isotopes, painting a faint but discernible signature across the light years. A single such signal would be revolutionary, but an even grander pattern is conceivable. What if multiple civilizations arising independently around different stars all converge on this same elegant solution? One could envision a silent galactic club, not of planets, but of cloud-bound city-states, each a luminous jewel set within the turbulent atmospheres of their home giants, all following a similar technological and sociological path shaped by the same unforgiving physics. This interstellar perspective forces a clarifying contrast with more established visions of our future. For decades, the dominant narrative of space colonization has focused on finding or terraforming another Earth, on carving out a familiar existence on the surface of Mars or under the domes of the Moon. The Sky City proposes a radical alternative: to not search for a copy of home, but to learn how to build a new kind of home within a fundamentally alien environment. It swaps planetary real estate for atmospheric tenure, trading solid ground for a mastered equilibrium. This is not necessarily a better path, but it is a profoundly different one, expanding the menu of options for human survival and flourishing. It suggests that our destiny might not be written solely on rocky worlds, but could be suspended in the beautiful, violent skies of gas giants, both here and perhaps in star systems we have yet to name. The ultimate lesson is about adaptability, the willingness to let go of planetary chauvinism and see the entire universe, in all its varied and hostile glory, as a place we can learn to belong. The choice for our future home is not a single destination, but a spectrum of possibilities, each with its own stark trade-offs. To truly understand the place of floating cities, we must place them side by side with their two great rivals in the vision for human expansion: the enclosed worlds of orbital habitats and the dusty plains of planetary surfaces like Mars. Each model represents a fundamentally different answer to the same question: how do we build a life beyond Earth? By comparing them across a few critical axes, we can see not which is best, but where each excels, and where the Sky City carves out its unique, audacious niche. Let us begin with the classic dream of orbital habitats, vast rotating cylinders proposed by visionaries like Gerard O'Neill. These are entirely artificial worlds, constructed in the empty space between planets, often at stable Lagrange points. Their greatest strength is total environmental control. Inside a spinning O'Neill cylinder, you can engineer a perfect Earth-like environment, with standard gravity simulated by rotation, a controlled 24-hour day-night cycle, and a carefully managed biosphere safe from cosmic radiation behind thick hulls or water shields. The psychological comfort of a familiar, sunlit landscape with open skies, even if those skies are painted on, cannot be overstated. However, this control comes at an immense logistical cost. As advocates of the L5 society often noted, these habitats are islands in a resource desert. Every atom of water, every molecule of air, every kilogram of soil must be hauled up from a deep planetary gravity well, likely the Moon or asteroids, at tremendous energy expense. They are closed systems of exquisite fragility, where a major hull breach is an immediate existential crisis. Contrast this with settling the surface of a planet like Mars, the goal championed by organizations like the Mars Society. Here, the primary advantage is the presence of a world itself, a vast landscape with real gravity, even if it is only 38% of Earth's. There are local resources to be used: water ice in the soil, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and regolith that can be processed into building materials. The expansion potential feels natural. You can literally walk in one direction and keep going. Yet the environment is relentlessly hostile in ways that demand constant, energy-intensive mitigation. The thin atmosphere offers negligible protection from radiation and micrometeorites, forcing colonists to live underground or in heavily shielded structures. The low gravity presents a major unknown for human health over generations, and the global dust storms can cripple solar power for months. Life on Mars is a permanent siege against a world that does not want you there. Now place the Sky City within this framework. Its profile is strikingly different. Like an orbital habitat, it exists within a medium, not on a surface, but that medium is not empty space. It is an ocean of raw materials. This is its supreme advantage: resource accessibility. Where an O'Neill cylinder must import everything, the Sky City is immersed in its feedstock, with atmospheric gases for fuel and manufacturing available in essentially limitless supply. Like Mars, it has a natural gravity field, but it is the full, crushing gravity of a gas giant, which the city cleverly uses for buoyancy rather than fights against. For radiation shielding, it sits beneath hundreds of kilometers of dense atmosphere, a far more robust barrier than any Hull or Martian hillside, yet its disadvantages are equally profound. It trades the predictable hazards of vacuum or a dry desert for the dynamic, chaotic violence of a permanent super hurricane. The engineering challenge of pressure management is inverted and vastly more complex than on Mars, and the psychological factor of having no solid ground whatsoever, only a calculated flotation in an infinite sky, is a unique psychological frontier. This comparison reveals that these models are not necessarily competitors, but potentially complementary components in a larger interplanetary ecosystem. Consider the synergy: a sky city floating in Jupiter's clouds, harvesting deuterium and helium-3, could become the primary fuel depot for the solar system, sending tankers of fusion fuel to power the industries of orbital habitats and the surface bases on Mars. In return, those lunar or asteroid mines could supply refined metals and rare earth elements that are scarce in a gaseous atmosphere, while Martian agricultural research could provide hardy crop strains for enclosed biospheres everywhere. A future settlement agency would conduct a cost-benefit analysis not on a single model, but on a portfolio, investing in the infrastructure that offers the highest return for a specific need: fuel production, scientific research, or human habitation. So, is the Sky City a niche solution or a superior model? The answer lies in time frame and purpose. For establishing the first permanent, self-sustaining human presence beyond Earth, the surface of Mars, despite its hardships, offers a more straightforward, incremental path using technologies we are already developing. For maximizing long-term, large-scale resource extraction and industrial capacity, the Sky City presents a compelling, if distant, vision of immense abundance. The orbital habitat may serve as the ideal compromise for large populations seeking Earth-normal conditions, once the supply chains to build and sustain them are mature. This comparative framework does not crown a winner, but it clarifies the specific research needed to advance the Cloud City from dream to blueprint. We must focus on conquering hydrodynamic stress and hydrogen embrittlement, challenges irrelevant to Mars or orbital stations, but which hold the key to unlocking an entire new class of world. The future of humanity in space is likely not a monoculture, but a diverse tapestry of habitats, each chosen because it turns a fundamental constraint of the cosmos into a foundational advantage. A blueprint for the clouds begins not with construction, but with a series of deliberate, earthbound questions. To transform a breathtaking vision into a viable project, we must define a concrete research agenda for the coming decades, a roadmap of critical experiments that can be conducted right now on Earth, in orbit, and with robotic scouts. This is the essential work of turning unknowns into engineering specifications. The first frontier is the brutal chemistry of the environment itself. We need to understand exactly how potential building materials behave when bathed in a supercritical soup of hydrogen and helium under immense pressure. Laboratories on Earth can simulate these conditions, placing samples of advanced alloys, carbon composites, and ceramics inside specialized chambers that replicate the temperature and pressure of Jupiter's habitable band. The goal is not just to find a material that survives, but to observe the molecular dance of hydrogen embrittlement in real time, searching for atomic structures that resist infiltration and remain flexible. This fundamental material science is the non-negotiable foundation, and it is work that can begin today in facilities that already study deep sea pressures or extreme planetary environments. Parallel to this, we must learn to perfect closed-loop living on a scale far beyond anything attempted. Isolated research stations provide the perfect test beds. Think of the scientific bases in Antarctica, like Concordia or the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, where crews live for months in a self-contained, harsh environment with no chance of immediate rescue. Expanding these into larger, more complex prototypes could teach us invaluable lessons about managing group dynamics, recycling every gram of water and air, and maintaining food production systems under psychological stress. Similarly, underwater habitats like the Aquarius Reef Base offer a unique analog for living under constant, confining pressure, where every system failure has immediate consequences. The goal of these experiments is to move from small, crew-tended modules to larger, partially automated biospheres that can sustain dozens of people for years, pushing our understanding of ecological balance and technical redundancy to new limits. Above our heads, in the calm cold of the stratosphere, another critical test awaits. Before we can float a city, we must master the art of holding a large, intelligent platform steady in a thin, dynamic sky. Projects like Google's now retired Loon, which used high-altitude balloons to provide internet access, or current efforts by companies like Worldview to operate stratospheric stations, are pioneering this very technology. The next step is to scale up, launching a prototype Aerostat not as a communications relay, but as a self-sustaining scientific platform. This vehicle would need to maintain its position for months, powered by solar energy and batteries, while actively adjusting its buoyancy and collecting atmospheric data. Success here would prove the core aviation principle of the entire vision, that we can design a structure to be a permanent, stable resident of a fluid sky. Each of these Earth and sky-based experiments generates data, but to truly validate the dream, we must return to the source. Robotic missions to the gas giants themselves need to evolve from flyby observers to immersed samplers. While NASA's upcoming Dragonfly mission to Saturn's moon Titan will explore a thick, nitrogen-rich atmosphere with a rotorcraft, the concepts needed for a gas giant are even more daring. Advanced atmospheric entry probes, successors to the Galileo probe that plunged into Jupiter in 1995, are essential. These next-generation scouts would need to be tougher, smarter, and equipped with more sophisticated chemical laboratories. Their mission would be to descend through the cloud layers, directly sampling the complex organic chemistry, measuring precise wind shear gradients, and identifying the most stable thermal bands. They would be our robotic fingertips touching the future itself. Prioritizing these goals requires a strategic lens. The most urgent and transformative data would likely come from the in-situ atmospheric probes, as they deliver ground truth that no simulation can perfectly match. Following that, the materials testing in simulated environments is critical to even design such a probe. Concurrently, the large-scale biosphere and aerostat tests build the parallel strands of knowledge needed for life and infrastructure. A realistic, ambitious timeline might see major strides in materials and probe design within 20 years, leading to a flagship robotic sampling mission within 30. A sustained, large-scale biosphere prototype could be operational in 15 years, with a stratospheric aerostat demonstrator within a decade. This is not the work of a single nation or company, but could be the mandate for a dedicated international institute, perhaps founded with the long-term goal of aeriform settlement studies. Such a body would coordinate these disparate threads of research, ensuring that a breakthrough in materials science informs the design of a stratospheric platform, and that lessons from a closed ecosystem in Antarctica shape the life support plans for a future atmospheric probe. The most transformative insight, however, might not come from a laboratory at all. Artists, filmmakers, and storytellers play a vital, often overlooked role in this research frontier. By visualizing these possibilities in compelling detail, They help society imagine the destination, building the cultural support and inspiring the next generation of engineers and scientists who will turn these experiments into reality. The journey to the clouds is built one careful, curious question at a time. The majestic cloud city of Bispin first appeared on screens over 40 years ago, a floating metropolis of gleaming spires and bustling landing platforms suspended in a gas giant's orange skies. Yet this iconic image did not spring from an engineering lab, but from the boundless imagination of a screenwriter and a concept artist. Long before a single equation was written, storytellers were already dreaming our future into existence, sketching the first blueprints for life above the clouds in the pages of novels and on cinema screens. This creative forethought is not a mere sideshow to science. It is the essential first draft of reality, where the impossible is given form and permission to be pursued. From the floating island of Laputa in Jonathan Swift's 18th century satire to the intricate, rain-drenched verticality of a city in the game Cloudpunk, science fiction has served as humanity's collective workshop for tomorrow, a space to experiment with the consequences of our ambitions long before we possess the tools to build them. Cultural historians note that these narratives do more than entertain. They shape the very language of possibility for both the public and the pioneers. When a scientist or engineer first envisioned a habitat in the atmosphere of Venus or Jupiter, the mental image they conjured was almost certainly filtered through the artistic lens of a film like Star Wars or a novel by authors like Arthur C. Clarke or Kim Stanley Robinson. These stories provide a shared visual and emotional vocabulary, transforming an abstract engineering problem into a relatable human drama of life in the clouds. They answer the visceral question of what it might feel like to live there, long before we can answer the technical question of how. This inspiration is a powerful catalyst, drawing young minds into fields of physics, aerospace, and design with a sense of wonder that pure data sheets cannot replicate. The dialogue between the artist's brush and the engineer's slide rule is a continuous loop where a fantastical concept sparks a line of scientific inquiry, and a new discovery, in turn, fuels the next generation of stories. Yet this creative freedom also allows fiction to take poetic license with the brutal laws of physics. Most depictions elegantly sidestep the grinding realities we have explored, the supersonic winds, the corrosive chemistry, the agonizing precision of buoyancy control. In Cloud City, the sun is always shining through the viewports, and the structures appear rock solid, with no visible strain from the eternal gales outside. This narrative simplification is not a failure, but a necessary focus, allowing the story to explore something even more critical: the human and social dimensions of such a life. Science fiction excels at asking the questions engineers might not prioritize in a feasibility study. What new social hierarchies emerge when your address is defined by altitude? What happens to crime and justice in a sealed environment where exile is a death sentence? How does a culture develop when its entire history is contained within a single, fragile structure? Games like Cloudpunk delve deeply into these themes, presenting a city divided between the opulent upper spires and the gritty, neon-soaked lower streets, a direct commentary on class and access that feels immediately relevant. Some of fiction's wildest ideas have, over time, migrated into serious scientific discourse, demonstrating this fertile cross-pollination. Arthur C. Clarke's detailed description of a space elevator in his novel The Fountains of Paradise is the most famous example, a concept now studied by NASA and research institutes worldwide with advanced materials like carbon nanotubes. Similarly, the notion of floating atmospheric platforms, once pure fantasy, is now an active area of research for high-altitude telecommunications and Earth observation. Fiction acts as a beacon pointing toward a potential future technology, and science then begins the arduous work of mapping a path to reach it. The visionary clouds of art gradually condense into the practical rain of innovation. This partnership suggests a vital role for future storytelling, not just in inspiring the how, but in anticipating the so what. As we move closer to making sky cities a reality, writers and artists have a new responsibility to help us think through the ethical dilemmas, the psychological pressures, and the cultural revolutions that will accompany the first foundation stone laid in the clouds. They can craft narratives that stress-test our social systems. Imagine the first great crisis of governance in a floating city-state, or explore the poignant beauty of a generation that knows no other home but the ever-shifting sky. This creative foresight is a form of compassionate engineering, building emotional and ethical resilience alongside the physical infrastructure. It ensures that when we finally achieve the technical triumph of a city in the clouds, we have also spent generations contemplating what it means to be human within it, making the dream not just achievable but worth living. The financial scale of a sky city is not measured in billions, but in trillions, a sum so vast it challenges our very conception of an economy. To even begin an assessment, we must borrow frameworks from the historians of technology who study how civilizations fund their most audacious dreams. The Apollo program, at its peak, consumed roughly 4.5% of the United States federal budget, a focused national effort born from geopolitical rivalry. The International Space Station, a collaboration of 15 nations, cost over $150 billion across 3 decades. Yet these projects pale before the likely multi-century, multi-trillion-dollar endeavor of building a self-sustaining civilization inside a gas giant. This is not a single mission, but the establishment of an entirely new branch of human industry, requiring us to invent new methods of accounting for ambitions that span generations. The first step is a sober breakdown of the colossal cost categories. Research and development alone would be a century-long enterprise, funding everything from advanced fusion prototypes to psychological studies of isolated communities. Next comes the monumental expense of materials manufacturing, not on Earth but in space. We would need to establish orbital foundries, likely around the Moon or asteroids, to process raw materials into the advanced carbon composites and smart alloys the city requires, avoiding the prohibitive cost of launching every beam and bolt from Earth's deep gravity well. Transportation then becomes a relentless financial river, funding thousands of heavy lift launches to ferry components to the construction site in the outer solar system. The assembly phase itself, a ballet of robotic and possibly crude construction in a lethal environment, would dwarf the complexity and cost of anything ever attempted. And this is merely to achieve first occupancy. The final, perpetual line item is maintenance, the endless energy and resource flow required to keep the city dancing with the storm for centuries, a financial heartbeat that must never stop. Weighing this against the benefits requires a shift to intergenerational economics. The fusion fuel harvested, the scientific discoveries made, and the technological spin-offs generated would not provide a return on investment in a quarterly report, but over the span of centuries, potentially unlocking wealth and capabilities for all of human civilization. This forces us to ask who could possibly pay for such a future. Funding models range from the pragmatic to the visionary. A global consortium, perhaps administered through a reformed United Nations framework, could levy a tiny, universal tax on financial transactions or carbon emissions, framing the project as a shared insurance policy for the species. Alternatively, a coalition of corporations and sovereign wealth funds might invest as an ultra-long-term venture, expecting their distant descendants to control the rights to the fuel and pharmaceuticals flowing from the clouds. In a more speculative future, a post-scarcity society with advanced automation might treat the project as a collective work of art and engineering, a voluntary solar system Kickstarter funded not by necessity, but by collective aspiration. A simple thought experiment puts the scale in perspective. If global economic output continues to grow at a modest rate, the world's gross domestic product in 200 years could be hundreds of times larger than it is today. Allocating even a fraction of a % of that future economy, directed by patient capital, could make the Sky City financially feasible, transforming an impossible sum today into a manageable investment for a far wealthier tomorrow. This analysis leads to the ultimate, uncomfortable question: is this the most efficient path for human advancement? Could those same trillions be better spent solving poverty, curing disease, or adapting to climate change on Earth? There is no easy answer, only a value judgment. The Sky City does not solve immediate terrestrial crises. It represents a different kind of investment, one in resilience, knowledge, and a future where our horizons are no longer bounded by a single, fragile planet. It is a bet that the challenges of building it will themselves catalyze breakthroughs that address other problems, and that the long-term payoff, a sustainable, resource-rich presence across the solar system, justifies the monumental upfront cost. This financial reality check does not kill the dream, but grounds it in the hard currency of choice and priority. It tells us that the timeline for a Sky City is not set by engineering alone, but by economics and collective will. The first city will not be built when the technology is ready, but when humanity, as a whole, decides that such a future is worth the price. The true timeline for a city in the clouds is not a single line on a calendar, but a fan of possible futures, each branching from the choices we make today. To synthesize everything we have explored, we can paint 3 distinct scenarios, each a plausible story of how this vision might unfold across the centuries. This method, known as scenario planning, is used by organizations like the Long Now Foundation to think in deep time, mapping not what will happen, but what could. The first is the optimistic path. This future is driven by a cascade of accelerating breakthroughs. Imagine artificial intelligence solving complex material science problems in months, not decades, and nanotechnology allowing us to assemble structures atom by atom. In this world, commercial fusion power is achieved within 50 years, providing the clean, abundant energy needed to kickstart space-based manufacturing. A sustained global commitment to space exploration, perhaps sparked by a new era of peaceful competition, funnels resources into the outer solar system. Here, the first small, manned research outpost, a pressurized module hosting a rotating crew of scientists, could be operational in as little as 150 years. It would be a fragile foothold, but a permanent one, floating in that narrow band of alien sky. The second, more sobering future is the pessimistic path. In this timeline, the grand challenges we have discussed prove insurmountable for generations. Perhaps hydrogen embrittlement defeats every material we can conceive, or practical fusion remains perpetually 50 years away. More likely, the political and economic will simply never coalesce. Earthbound crises, conflicts, or a turning inward of civilizational focus forever divert resources and attention. The vision remains a captivating thought experiment, discussed in academic papers and science fiction, but the first prototype never leaves the drawing board. In this scenario, the first operational city might not appear for a millennium. If ever, a dream deferred for a future humanity with a different set of priorities and perhaps a different spirit. Between these two extremes lies the realistic middle path, the most probable course given historical patterns of human progress. This path is neither a sprint nor a standstill, but a slow, grinding marathon of incremental advance. It acknowledges setbacks, funding cycles, and the sheer difficulty of operating so far from home. In this future, we achieve fusion power, but it takes a century to make it reliable and compact. We build larger closed-loop biospheres, but they suffer unexpected failures that take years to understand and fix. Robotic probes return invaluable data from the gas giants, but follow-up missions are delayed by budget debates. Here, the timeline stretches. A permanent, unmanned research platform might be established in 200 years. A century after that, we see the first long-duration crewed mission, a one-year stay inside a fortified ship. Finally, 250 to 300 years from now, that first permanent manned station becomes a reality, a tiny seed that will take centuries more to slowly grow into anything we could call a city. The trigger events that steer us toward one path or another are critical to identify. A decisive global agreement on space resource rights could unlock private investment. A major breakthrough in room temperature superconductors could revolutionize energy transmission and magnetic shielding. Conversely, a prolonged period of terrestrial instability or a catastrophic failure of an early, high-profile space settlement could shatter political support for generations. What we do today matters immensely within this framework. Our role is to lay the technological and philosophical groundwork, supporting basic research in materials science and fusion, advocating for stable, long-term funding for space science, and fostering a cultural narrative that values intergenerational projects are all tangible actions that push the needle toward the optimistic or realistic path. Think of a child born today. In the realistic scenario, their great-great-grandchild could be born in that first outpost, a citizen of a new kind of world. This long view challenges our innate desire for quick results, asking us to invest in a future we will never see, for people we will never know. It transforms the Sky City from a project into a legacy, a gift passed forward through time. Which future feels most probable from where you stand now? The answer depends less on the laws of physics and more on the enduring nature of human ambition. The Sky City is more than a habitat. It is a philosophical declaration about what a world can be. For all of human history, our concept of home has been inextricably tied to a surface, to the ground beneath our feet, to the horizon line, and to the soil from which we grow our food. We are creatures of the crust, our stories and civilizations built upon the thin, solid skin of a planet. The vision of a floating metropolis shatters this ancient paradigm, proposing a future where we are no longer surface dwellers, but volumetric beings, making our home within the vast, dynamic volume of a world, not merely perched upon its outermost shell. This is a transformation as profound as when life first crawled from the oceans onto land, but this time the journey is one of conscious design. The philosopher Hannah Arendt spoke of the human condition as being rooted in labor, work, and action upon the earth, a world we inherit and transform. In a Sky City, that condition is radically renegotiated. The world is not inherited, it is selected and actively constructed within a chosen medium, the atmosphere itself. Every breath of air, every joule of energy, every square meter of living space is the product of a continuous, conscious act of creation and maintenance. This transforms our relationship with our environment from one of adaptation and occasional mastery to one of intimate, perpetual co-authorship. The astronaut's overview effect, that cognitive shift in awareness reported by those who see Earth from orbit, is often described as a feeling of profound connection and fragility. For a citizen born and raised in the clouds of Jupiter, that perspective is inverted. Their overview is not of a distant, fragile marble, but of the infinite, swirling interior of their own world. Their sense of fragility is not for a blue planet seen through a viewport, but for the delicate, engineered bubble of atmosphere that sustains them, a bubble they can see being tested by the eternal storm outside their window. This lived reality would forge a new planetary consciousness, one centered not on borders and biomass, but on gradients, currents, and equilibrium. Art and expression would naturally flow from this new sensory and existential reality. Imagine music that mimics the deep, resonant frequencies of atmospheric pressure waves, or visual art that captures the hypnotic, chaotic beauty of ammonia crystal formations in a never-setting sun. Spirituality might evolve to revere not mountains and rivers, but stability and flow, finding the divine in the perfect balance of a closed loop or the majestic, impersonal power of a storm larger than a planet. Nature is not left behind, but its definition expands. On Earth, nature is the complex, self-regulating system of the biosphere. In the Sky City, nature is the even more vast and powerful system of the gas giants' atmospheric dynamics. This forces the development of a new environmental ethic, one that sees value and worth in protecting not just forests and oceans, but the integrity of atmospheric layers and chemical cycles within an alien environment. The act of building a life there would demand a deep, operational respect for the system you are embedded within, precisely because your survival depends on not destabilizing it. This leads to a poignant and hopeful paradox. By learning to build and sustain a perfect miniature biosphere inside a hostile giant, we might finally internalize the principles needed to cherish and sustain the grand, natural biosphere of Earth. The Sky Citizen, whose every calorie and molecule of oxygen is tracked and recycled, develops an intuitive, visceral understanding of systemic interdependence that those of us on a seemingly limitless planet can too easily ignore. They live the reality that there is no way to throw things, and that every input has an output that must be accounted for. This hard-won wisdom, born from absolute necessity, could become their greatest export back to a terrestrial civilization struggling with its own environmental challenges. Ultimately, the Sky City asks us what it means to be human when your entire world is something you built. It suggests that our identity is not bound to dirt and rock, but to our capacity for care, for community, and for the conscious stewardship of the fragile systems that allow life to exist. To choose to live inside a giant is to accept a perpetual, beautiful responsibility, a declaration that home is not a place we find, but a condition we create and sustain together against the magnificent backdrop of an unyielding universe. Our journey through the clouds has reached its final horizon. We began within the violent, beautiful skies of a gas giant, and we have navigated the staggering challenges of engineering a home there, from hurricane-force winds to the silent threat of hydrogen embrittlement. We have designed societies of radical interdependence, economies based on harvesting starlight and isotopes, and cultures that would find art in the dance of eternal storms. This vision is far more than a blueprint for a city. It is a mirror held up to the soul of our species. It reflects our boundless ambition, our relentless curiosity, and that deep-seated, irreducible need to push beyond the familiar, to explore and to create. The pioneering rocket scientist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky once observed that the Earth is the cradle of humanity, but mankind cannot stay in the cradle forever. The floating city is one possible answer to that call, a proposal for a new kind of cradle, one we would build for ourselves within the clouds of another world. Whether this specific vision ever shifts from dream to reality is almost secondary. The true value lies in the act of envisioning it at all, by stretching our imagination to its absolute limit, by daring to solve problems that do not yet exist. We expand the boundaries of what is possible. The technologies and social insights forged in contemplating this future, from perfect closed-loop ecosystems to new models of community, inevitably ripple back to help us solve the pressing challenges of our own time and our own planet. So we leave you with a question not of engineering but of spirit. Do you see this as a glorious next chapter for humanity, a necessary step in our growth as a species, or as a magnificent folly, a distraction from the world we already have? The answer tells a story about what you believe we are capable of and what kind of future is worth building. Share your perspective in the comments below. We are genuinely curious to hear what you think. If this exploration of humanity's potential on the final frontier captivated you, please subscribe for more journeys to the edges of science and imagination. Thank you for joining this flight of thought, and remember, no matter where you are, to keep looking.